As with any journey into uncharted territory, unforeseen problems will almost definitely arise. And when they do, you better hope you have the means to solve these problems, because no one is coming to help you in space. The Apollo missions to the moon were no exceptions and did indeed encounter a few issues along the way. A problem no one could have foreseen, however, was moon dust. The moon is covered with an extremely fine powder-like substance. At first glance, it's harmless. I mean, after all, it's just dust. But as the Apollo astronauts would discover, it wasn't as harmless as it first seemed. Moon dust is created by micrometeorite impacts which completely pulverize the lunar surface. Because there's no wind or any other natural elements on the moon which can gradually erode these tiny particles and fragments, they remain extremely sharp. This moon dust prevented spacesuits and other equipment from working as intended. For example, astronauts had trouble moving their arms during moonwalks as the joints of the suits became damaged by the moon dust. It's so corrosive that it even cut through 3 layers of Kevlar-like material on one of the astronauts' boots. To make matters worse, it's also electrostatic, which makes it cling to anything it comes in contact with. After long moonwalks, the spacesuits were covered in this black soot that both looked and smelled like gunpowder. As it was more or less impossible not to bring the dust back into the lunar module, it caused some pretty significant issues for the astronauts themselves. It got so bad during the Apollo 12 mission that the astronauts were forced to keep their helmets on inside the module to prevent as much of it as possible from getting into their eyes and lungs. Does life exist beyond the Earth? I've talked about this many times before, and of course the answer is always, we don't know. But that isn't technically true. We can almost certainly say that life does exist on both the Moon and on Mars. When NASA and other space agencies send stuff and people to other worlds in the solar system, they go through meticulous stages of sterilization. But there's a great irony in this sterilization process, because while these harshly sterilized environments do indeed get rid of bacteria and other microbial life forms that we do not want to contaminate other celestial bodies with, they also provide the perfect conditions for bacteria that can survive in space and thus other planets. Essentially, we're able to remove almost everything except the things that have the greatest chance of surviving in space. However, just because they hitch a ride to another world does not mean we'll see Martians or Moonsians anytime soon. It's more than likely that these extremophiles will eventually die instead of evolving into something new. Still, it is now for the first time in our history technically wrong to say that the Earth is the only place in the universe with life. Ever since the discovery of Saturn, people have been fascinated by the planet's rings. It really makes Saturn stand out from the rest of the planets and makes it easily recognizable. But since the 1970s, we've discovered that Saturn isn't such a special snowflake after all. In fact, we now know that all the gas giants in our solar system have these rings. In order of their discovery, these include Saturn, Uranus, Jupiter, and Neptune. But aside from Saturn, these ring systems are composed of mostly dust and particles, which makes them extremely faint. But there's actually one more body in the solar system known to have rings. It's neither a planet, dwarf planet, nor a moon, but instead something classified as a centaur. A centaur is a minor planet that orbits the Sun between Jupiter and Neptune and crosses the orbits of one or more planets. And yeah, they're named after the mythological beings of the same name. The centaur, known as 10199 Chariklo, is the largest one to be discovered so far, and it just so happens to also have rings. It's the first of its kind, and before its discovery, no one thought it was even possible for small bodies like these to have a ring system. Personally, I think one of the most amazing things about space is weightlessness. Floating around without the constant struggle against gravity must be an incredibly alleviating sensation. But weightlessness causes the human body to behave in ways that make completely normal things not so normal. For example, you can't burp in space. The reason we burp is because air enters our stomach while we eat or drink, for example. But our stomach doesn't really like air and other gases, so it tries to push it back out. All the food and liquid stays at the bottom while the unwanted gases is pushed to the top. But it's only able to do this because of gravity. In the absence of gravity, or in microgravity, all the gas, liquids and food are unable to separate, which makes it difficult to only push gas back out again. This will cause you to slightly vomit instead of simply burping and is known as a wet burp. Another annoyance comes with urinating. Our body normally lets us know that it's time to pee when our bladder is around 1/3 full. But in low gravity environments, the fluid will just keep bouncing around. Only when the bladder is almost completely full do the sides begin to stretch and trigger the urge to pee. Even something as basic as sleep can be quite dangerous and even life-threatening if not done correctly. What you need to make sure of before you go to sleep in space is that you have to have good ventilation around you. Because if you don't, there's a risk that you'll end up with a bubble of your own exhaled carbon dioxide. This will result in oxygen starvation and, best case, you'll wake up with a severe headache, struggling to breathe. Being an astronaut requires you to be exceptional at a lot of things. One example is that you need to be able to remain calm and focused during very stressful situations. But that's of course easier said than done, given that when you're out on a spacewalk, there's only a suit between you and the vacuum of space. Now, what if, against all odds, your spacesuit began filling with water? In 2013, this is exactly what happened to Italian astronaut Luca Parmitano while performing repairs on the ISS. Roughly an hour into the spacewalk, he noticed that his helmet was slowly filling with water. As he reported this to the people on the ground, the volume of the water just kept on increasing, and at the time they couldn't figure out where it was coming from. Eventually it was deemed that there was a chance of him actually drowning in his own suit, so the mission was quickly aborted. It was later revealed that the liquid cooling system in the suit had caused the leak. Of course, Parmitano, being a trained professional, remained completely calm when faced with the possibility of being the first man to drown in space. This is the only photo taken from the surface of another body beyond Mars. It was taken in 2005 and is from the surface of Saturn's largest moon, Titan. Now, Titan is an interesting place. Just like the Earth, it has lakes and rivers. Unlike the Earth, these are not filled with water, but instead liquid ethane, methane and propane. You see, the average temperature on Titan is around -180 degrees Celsius. Because it's so extremely cold, the probe only remained functional for about 90 minutes after touchdown and was only able to send this single photograph from the surface. Titan also has a very interesting atmosphere which consists of a thick haze. The atmosphere is several times denser than here on Earth, and gravity on Titan is several times weaker. If you weighed, say, 80 kilo, you would only weigh around 12 kilo on Titan. In fact, if you could theoretically survive on the surface and had a wingsuit on, because of the low gravity coupled with the dense atmosphere, you would be able to fly simply by waving your arms around. In 1936, just before the eruption of World War II, Adolf Hitler made a speech during the Olympic Games opening ceremony, which was broadcasted to 41 countries across the globe, reaching millions of people. It's significant because it was broadcasted at a very high frequency, which likely allowed the signals to get through the Earth's ionosphere. In other words, the signals were able to escape the Earth and continued out into space. This has led some to believe that one of the first things potential aliens might hear are the words of Adolf Hitler. In fact, this is the exact plot for the book written by Carl Sagan titled Contact. It was even made into a movie in 1997. But this is only within the realm of science fiction and could never actually happen in real life. You see, many TV shows and other signals like these will drastically diffuse over time and at best will only be able to propagate a couple of light years away before they become identical to background noise. It's something known as inverse square law. Even if some of these signals inexplicably made it to some of the closest exoplanets to the Earth, and we assume that intelligent extraterrestrials do exist on one of these planets, and these aliens just happens to aim the correct technology able to pick up these unbelievably weak and quiet signals towards the Earth, they would still most likely not be able to extract any audio, visuals, or other tangible information from these signals. They would simply be too feeble and diluted once they get there. However, given that they can detect these signals in the first place, they would likely recognize them as technological signatures, something that could not have occurred naturally in space, and would thus give them a confirmation to the eternal question, are we alone in the universe? When we think of planets, we think of them as orbiting around a star. In fact, a planet is defined as a celestial body moving in an elliptical orbit round a star. But what if something should happen to that star which leaves the planet all alone? Or if something happens to the planet which causes it to slingshot away from its star system on an endless, lonesome journey through the cosmos? Astronomers have theorized about the existence of such rogue planets for decades, and it's only recently that we've actually found them. But they can be incredibly difficult to discover. After all, once they leave their parent star, they become near invisible against the blackness of space. The planet will find itself in an eternal state of night, and the only visible light will come from the galaxy itself. Some estimate that there could be billions of rogue planets in the Milky Way alone, and so far we've only found a handful, most of which could just as well be brown dwarfs, or in other words, a failed star. But the concept of a rogue planet gives rise to a whole set of new questions. One of the most perplexing: could life potentially exist and survive on a planet without a star? Maybe. If it's a planet with a lot of water, that water will obviously freeze as it's exposed to the near absolute zero temperatures of space. But ice is actually a pretty good insulator, so if the ocean is at least a few tens of kilometers deep, the water will remain liquid at the bottom because of the heat internally generated by the planet's core. Life could then thrive around hotspots like hydrothermal vents on the ocean floor. Another alternative would be if the planet had an extremely hydrogen-rich atmosphere. It would need to be tens or even hundreds of times thicker than the atmosphere here on Earth, which would then act as an insulator to retain liquid water even at the surface. Orbital debris, which is any man-made object in orbit around our planet which doesn't serve any useful purpose, is becoming an increasing problem. We're currently tracking around 600,000 pieces of debris larger than 1 centimeter. Roughly 30,000 of these are over 1 decimeter wide, but there's still many hundreds of millions of pieces which are simply too small to keep track of. What's so dangerous about these seemingly insignificant tiny fragments is the speed at which they travel. They orbit the Earth at speeds up to 28,000 kilometers per hour. Even something as tiny as flecks of paint can be disastrous when traveling at these velocities. In fact, a number of space shuttle windows have been replaced simply because of damage caused by flecks of paint. Usually when a tracked piece of debris is about to collide with a functional spacecraft, a so-called debris avoidance maneuver is performed. This actually happens all the time, and even aboard the ISS, in which the entire space station is moved a few kilometers to avoid a potential collision. But the thing is, we may already have crossed a point of no return. Even if we stop sending anything into space right this moment, it will continue to get worse. You see, the amount of debris which is already in orbit will continue to collide with each other and thus create even more debris. So far the problem is manageable, but a solution needs to be found quickly. And while NASA and many others are working on solutions, it's not an easy problem to solve. I mean, the sheer scale and cost of resolving this issue is like nothing we've ever seen before, and if we do nothing, we will quite literally enclose the Earth in a blanket of garbage. There's something known as the overview effect. Many astronauts and cosmonauts alike have reported a strong sensation of euphoria and even a significant cognitive shift in their perspective on life as well as themselves once they saw the Earth from a distance. Many have explained it as an overwhelming sensation that everything in the universe is somehow connected, but national boundaries completely vanish, coupled with the realization that our world is incredibly fragile. It sounds like they're high, right? Maybe someone brought a little something with them on their trip to space, who knows? But at the same time, it seems like a quite reasonable reaction. Looking back at the Earth from a distance must be an experience like none other. And what makes it so interesting is that it's not an isolated incident. Many people who have returned from space after looking back at our planet, either from orbit or from the moon, have explained the sensation in a very similar fashion. Psychologists, neuroscientists and physicians have all reported that many of these people have had a notable shift in their behavior and outlook on life and the world. To end this video, here's a quote from astronaut Edgar D. Mitchell describing what he experienced upon seeing the Earth from the moon. You develop an instant global consciousness, a people orientation, an intense dissatisfaction with the state of the world and a compulsion to do something about it. From out there on the moon, international politics looks so petty. You want to grab a politician by the scruff of their neck and drag him 250,000 miles out and say, "Look at that, you son of a bitch."